All right, it's already episode 5 of the Average Fantasy Cast. Feels like we're just flying by here. We're a couple weeks until the regular season of football. Crossing our fingers. Hopefully, I don't know what I would do without NFL football. So hopefully things stay the way they are. Everyone's here. Joe's getting ready to go back to Athens tomorrow. Everyone's jealous of him.
Of course.
But boys, we got a really fun episode today. We got the NFC South. It's a loaded division in terms of talent in the NFL, maybe one of the best divisions of football, and it's got great talent for fantasy football. And obviously, when you add Tom Brady, the GOAT, I know Joe, a lifelong Patriots fan, it's a tough pill to swallow, him and Gronk going there together, but man, it's going to make for a lot of fun football games down there in Tampa. So we're going to start with the quarterbacks, and you've got a lot of experienced guys. You've got Tom Brady, you've got Drew Brees, 2 future first ballot Hall of Famers. You've got Matt Ryan, who in respectfully, he's put up a very nice career. And then you have Teddy Bridgewater now with the Carolina Panthers after he was with the Saints filling in for Drew Brees. He cashed in on his time with the Saints and got a very nice contract with the Panthers. So gentlemen, I want to debate, if you're taking a quarterback from this division, are you taking Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Matt Ryan, or taking a chance on Teddy Bridgewater?
I think it's who isn't taking Tom Brady here. It's one of those Stephen A's, with all due respect, I'm taking Tom Brady over Drew Brees and Matt Ryan. Teddy Bridgewater, I mean, he's really good, but he's more like game manager.
Yeah, you take Teddy Bridgewater over Tom Brady in fantasy football, let alone real football. You've got some issues that you need to figure out.
I'm just saying, you're not taking him as a starter. And Tom hasn't had the weapons like this probably since 2010. I think he's not going to be an MVP, but he's definitely going to put up around 30 touchdowns, I think, and probably like 10 picks. He's going to be elite.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, guys. So right now on ESPN, the draft site, Tom Brady is going as QB7, Drew Brees QB8, Matt Ryan QB9. So back to back. It's really splitting hairs here. Fleck, I know you are not with the consensus here. You don't think Tom Brady is going to be the best fantasy quarterback in this division.
No, I'm taking Drew Brees in this situation, and I'll tell you why. It's because of consistency. You know, Tom Brady's
not consistent?
I'm not saying he's not consistent. I'm just saying Drew Brees is the more consistent option here. I mean, yes, Brady didn't really have a lot of help last year in New England, and obviously he's got Godwin and Evans and in Tampa and Gronk as well, and he's going to be slinging it. But if I'm looking at the two of them, I'm going with Brees, and I just think he's just more consistent. He's a little younger, and granted, that really has nothing to do in this situation because
they're both
over 40. He's 41, Brady's 43, but Brees, this might be his last year in the NFL. He's going to want to win another Super Bowl, and in order to do that, he's going to have to put up some great numbers during the regular season, put his team in the best chance to win that Super Bowl. And so I think he's just going to be slinging it all year long. Obviously Brady is too, but I just like Brees in this situation.
Brees did finish hot down the stretch. I think in his final 8 games after he came back from that injury, 6 of his final 8, he scored 20 fantasy points or more. So fair argument from Fleck. Guys, obviously, I think Tom Brady is the obvious pick, but don't overlook Matt Ryan. I think he's a guy that I know that sometimes he can be inconsistent, but Atlanta finished really well down the stretch, saved Dan Quinn's job. Calvin Ridley's going to be coming back healthy. Of course, he's still got Julio Jones. They add Todd Gurley in the backfield. They should be able to run the football better. And then they add Hayden Hurst, who I think is one of the best additions in the offseason for any team except outside of DeAndre Hopkins going to the Cardinals. I think Matt Ryan is a guy that, if you don't want to pay the price for one of those top 5-6 quarterbacks, Brady and Brees might get reached by. I think Matt Ryan is a really good QB1 option that you can feel good about. It would not surprise me if Matt Ryan ended up being the best quarterback in the division, because we expect, guys, a lot of shootouts in this division. We expect a lot of high-scoring games, which means a lot of touchdowns, a lot of throwing the football, and that is going to be very, very good for the quarterbacks in this division.
Yeah, I completely agree, Tommy. I think for the value to it, where they're being drafted, I think Matt Ryan could end up being statistically one of the best out of the three options. I mean, if you look at 2018, he was the second best fantasy quarterback in fantasy football. And that year, he put up almost 5,000 passing yards, 35 touchdowns, and 7 picks. And so if he can come back and not have the first half of the season when the entire team is struggling, plus the more times Matt Ryan can play in the dome, you have to start in fantasy football when Matt Ryan plays in the dome. Simple as that.
Absolutely.
But I mean, just based off the weapons alone, Tom Brady's very, very intriguing. It's going to definitely get a lot of people's attention. And I think because of that, he'll be drafted fairly high. So for value and what you want in fantasy football, if you're like me, and unless you have Lamar or Patrick Mahomes sitting there in the third round, you're not going to draft a quarterback until the 10th, 11th, and 12th round. And I think Matt Ryan might still be hanging around at that time, snagging. He'll definitely help your team win a fantasy championship if you have a good supporting cast around him.
Yeah, ESPN posted something very interesting, like they do those videos, and the headline is, "Where will Tom Brady's fantasy points come from?" I'm going to just take a guess, gentlemen, that it's probably going to come from passing yards and passing touchdowns. Like,
Really? You don't think he's a scrambler?
I don't know. I mean, I guess he does have a history of sneaking in touchdowns at the goal line, but...
Hey, I'll never forget when he juked out Brian Urlacher, so...
It would not surprise me if Tom Brady threw 40 touchdown passes this year. That's all I'm going to say. I think these are the best weapons he's had in his career. I think... And Ronald Jones, yes, he's expected to take the next step, whatever that means. I think Brady's going to say, look, I'm throwing the ball around the goal line. Like, I'm putting the ball in the end zone every single time. So I think 40 touchdowns for Tom Brady could happen this year at age 43, which is insane.
I wouldn't be surprised if Drew Brees, Matt Ryan, and Tom Brady all had 30-plus touchdowns this season. I mean, Drew Brees last year had 27, and he missed 5 or 6 games. Matt Ryan he had 26, and he had a down year, and Brady had 24 with maybe the worst supporting cast he's ever had on offense at 42 years old. And so I think any of those three will be great. Teddy Bridgewater has potential if you want a solid QB2 option for your bye week and see if he pops off with Matt Rule in a college offense with Christian McCaffrey, arguably the best fantasy running back since LaDainian Tomlinson. Just go for Teddy Bridgewater as a QB2. Don't touch him for a QB1.
I was going to say, don't forget about my boy, Teddy Bridgewater, man. I picked him up in every league that I'm in.
You and Adam Stafford, quick shout out to Staff. He is obsessed with Teddy Bridgewater. Like, he thinks he is going to have a good season, and I'm sorry.
I mean, I'm not drafting him as my quarterback 1, but if you're late in the draft and you can pick up him, I think he's a great, solid quarterback to put on your bench and see what he can do. I mean, he threw 9 touchdowns and only 2 interceptions in the 6 games that he played with New Orleans, and that was at a 68% pass completion rating. And I just think he's gonna be good. Like, he's gonna be consistent. He's gonna give them what they want.
He's getting hurt week 6.
Now, let me ask you a question. Who would you? So, like, if you're going for a second quarterback, and you had the option between, let's say, Drew Lock, Cam Newton, and Teddy Bridgewater, who would you take? Fleck, would you still take him?
Yeah, I'm still taking Teddy Bridgewater in this situation. I just think with what he did in New Orleans, and granted, New Orleans does have a great offense, and so all he had to really do was step in there and do what he was supposed to. I just really like him for this season. I mean, they paid him, and they're going to use him to the best of their ability, and he's going to be effective, I think.
I'm taking Cam Newton in his beautiful hair and his ESPN mugshot that they got up there. They've got some funny, for all you fantasy footballers, you play on ESPN, they've got some pretty funny mugshots up there. My buddy Colton Brucker said that Zeke Elliott looks like Princess Leia with his hair. It's pretty comical. But anyways, it's going to be a fun division. I can't wait to see these quarterbacks go at it. These games are going to be in the 30s, might hit the 40. Gosh, they could hit the 50s. It's going to be fun. But
the Bucs had a good defense. I mean, they had a really solid defense last year, especially at the end.
They have a pretty good pass rush. Their secondary can be taken advantage of by experienced quarterbacks. But I think Todd Bowles is going to have that unit playing out of their mind now that they got Tom Brady over there. But I just want to say, out of those 3 options for QB2 that Joe proposed, I still go with Bridgewater just because of the potential that offense could have, being with DJ Moore, adding Robbie Anderson, and then they always have Christian McCaffrey, who was a 1,000-yard back last season. So, I mean, Teddy Bridgewater, very low risk, high reward QB2 option. He's not going to turn the ball over. He has a decent deep ball, and he's just not going to make mistakes. And then in an offense like that, in a division where every game's going to matter, at a QB2, that's what I want.
He's very well coached.
Very, very well coached. By who? Sean Payton? I mean, I love Sean Payton.
And Zimmerman in Minnesota before.
Yeah, but there's a reason why he didn't work out in Minnesota.
Yeah, he almost lost his leg.
Yeah.
That's true.
And then they had Case Keenum.
Case Keenum, maybe the best backup in the NFL. No, I'm just kidding.
So I think this is a good question,
Foles.
guys.
Nick Foles, you mean Mitch Trubisky?
I don't know. He's lighting camp up.
All right, boys.
So moving on to, I really want to hear what you guys are saying. So we're looking at all these weapons that Tom Brady has. Mike Evans versus Chris Godwin. Who do you guys got? Which player would you pick on your team?
I like Mike Evans.
Mike
I think
Evans.
that probably won't
Of
be
course
the
you like Mike
consensus.
Evans. You drafted Mike Evans.
Yeah, and I also traded away Chris Godwin this offseason in the league.
You traded away for what?
I got Aaron Jones and a first-round draft pick.
Oh, I would not have done that.
Yeah, I know you wouldn't have, Tommy.
Aaron Jones.
But
Aaron Jones.
I like Mike
is
Evans.
to be a Green Bay Packer after this season. It's going to be the A.J. Dillon show next year.
Okay, agree to disagree. But Mike Evans last season had 118 targets with 67 catches, about 1,500 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns, and he didn't play the final 3 games of the year. In 2018, he had 20 more catches, 400 more yards than what he had in 2019. You add Tom Brady to that, who loves a tall, deep threat receiver. Look at what he did with Randy Moss. I think Mike Evans is one of the best deep threats in the league. He
Mike
has
Evans
one of
is
the
not
highest. Okay, yeah, but with Tom Brady, he could be just like him. And if you look at the highlights that come out of their camp so far, Tom Brady apparently has been flinging it 50, 60 yards. Mike Evans is going to have a career year this year. I think both of them are going to be solid options, but I think Mike Evans, just overall consistency-wise, since he's been in the league, has been one of the best deep threats, and Tom Brady is licking his chops to get him the ball.
You know, Bob,
I mean,
you
you're
wanna
talking
talk
about
last year.
Bob, you talked about Randy Moss. You name dropped Randy Moss, and just to put something in perspective, the only other NFL wide receiver besides Randy Moss that has had 6 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons is Mike Evans.
To start
And
the career.
this man is consistent. He also averages 14 and a half PPR fantasy points per game in his 90 active games since 2014. And there's only, 5 other receivers that have done that? DeAndre Hopkins, OBJ, Michael Thomas, Antonio Brown, Julio Jones. Like, to be in there with those guys, he's the obvious choice here.
It's elite company.
Wait, what?
Elite
He's the
company.
obvious choice? Wait a second. Do we,
I think-
do we just
okay,
live under a
it's
rock?
pretty
Hold on a
close.
second. Chris Godwin was drafted 2 or 3 rounds lower than Mike Evans last year, and Chris Godwin was the number 2 fantasy football receiver behind Michael Thomas, and he missed the final 2 weeks of the season, gentlemen. And guess what? Bob, you want to talk about last year? Last year, Julian Edelman with Tom Brady. Julian Edelman, 33-year-old Julian Edelman, caught 100 passes. What do you think Tom Brady's going to do with Chris Godwin in the slot? A young, fresh-legged, 24-year-old receiver, fresh off a breakout season. It's going to be
whenever
the Chris
Mike
Godwin
Evans is
show
doubled.
with the Buccaneers. 100%.
That's a good point.
Are you kidding me? Julian Edelman, 100 receptions. Chris Godwin might go
really
120
until they
this
had
year.
Mohamed Sanu, who was washed up when he got there. Tom Brady makes the best of what he has. He made Deion Branch an elite receiver. So Tom Brady
Chris
with Mike
Godwin
Evans.
is just as good, if not a better receiver than Mike Evans. Chris Godwin will be a better fantasy receiver than Mike Evans.
Board bet.
No.
Board bet.
Right,
Definitely
so-
would bet that one.
Chris Godwin. will
Just for
finish better than
context,
Mike Evans. You could
Chris
put it on the
Godwin-
board. Come on, Chris Godwin.
Go ahead, Joe. Go ahead, Joe.
Fantasy championship winning pick last year.
Just for context, Chris Godwin is going 20th ESPN ADPs right now. Chris Godwin 20th, Mike Evans 21st. So they're going about the same spot.
That's right. That's right.
So
Even
it'd be a
Talking
steal.
value, I'm
Yeah.
taking Mike
you
Evans.
know what? The
Mike
world.
I think
all
there's
day.
something that needs to be said about Tom Brady posting Instagram videos about throwing the ball to Mike Evans and not Chris Godwin.
Oh, what?
Chemistry's already there.
Chemistry.
Oh,
I agree.
He favors.
We're really
Mike
going to
Evans.
fall
Tom
for that
Brady
crap.
loves big-bodied targets. Mike Evans is essentially a fast tight end. Even in the red zone, Mike Evans is going to be a more reliable option for Tom Brady than Chris Godwin. Not to mention the fact
Guess
that
what?
they
We all
already
said
have
last year
chemistry.
that Mike Evans was the better pick than Chris Godwin. Guess what? Chris Godwin exploded.
Last year was last year.
Give me Chris.
Yeah, last year was last year,
It's
and
Jameis
Mike
Winston.
Evans consistently, like Flex said, 6,000-yard seasons to start his career. Tom Brady's not stupid. He knows there's a reason he did that with Jameis
Listen, both
freaking
guys-
Winston.
Both guys are going to be profitable in fantasy. Personally, I would much rather have those guys over. I mean, you can make an argument to me to pick them over Julio, maybe even Tyreek Hill, given the fact that the way Tampa's going to move the football. I mean, I would have no problem with people saying that they pick them over them just because I think Tampa is going to be so pass heavy.
I think they could end up being the 2 and 3 overall fantasy wide receivers
Oh,
this year.
100%.
To
And that would
Mike
be
Thomas
great. I
being
think
one.
everyone would be happy in here if that happened.
I would because I have him on a team. That'd be really fun for me.
That would be fun for you.
So Bob, you said Mike Evans is like a big, he's like a tight end running down the field. So looking at the actual tight end for the Buccaneers, Gronk. What do we think of Gronk?
Gronk. The real life Incredible Hulk.
Yeah, I don't think Gronk is a top 5 tight end. I really think if you're going to pick him, he's going to be your starting tight end, but you're going to need a handcuff there. You're going to need something else to support you there.
Maybe Herndon.
You just need some volume. I think Gronk's going to be there late. Like
tight end 6.
Wise, he's going to be there. He's going to be catching, passes from Tom, and especially in the clutch. But fantasy wise, probably like 10th best tight end right now.
I think going at 6. It's pretty rich. But personally, I'm taking Gronk over Evan Ingram, Tyler Higbee, Hunter Henry. I'll gamble that. Like, you know what? It's not like me picking Gronk over Evan Ingram or Tyler Higbee is not going to cost me my fantasy season. Maybe
I think it might cost you some
if
games.
Ingram can stay healthy for a whole season, he's insane. He has the speed of a wide receiver at tight end. But for me, I could easily see Gronk being a fantasy football playoff savior. I think Bruce Arians is going to save him towards the end of the year when games really start to matter, when the team's fatigued, when O.J. Howard is probably not feeling his best, and when Tom Brady is going to love having that security blanket he's had for the past however many years. And so I definitely don't expect Gronk to have a very productive first half of this season, but I think the second half of the season he could very well save some teams' playoffs hopes for fantasy football.
I think Gronk is a sell-high candidate. I think that Brady, with their chemistry, I could see Gronk getting off to a really hot start, catching a lot of touchdowns around the goal line. And once Brady gets that in-game chemistry with Evans and Godwin, don't be afraid. I know people are going to, if Gronk gets hot, you might want to try and trade him while he's hot, especially if you're in a dynasty league. He is older.
Oh, yeah.
He's playing as long as Brady goes, and Brady's probably going 2 or 3 more years, maybe 4. Who knows?
He's been hurt a little bit.
He gets banged up, but no, I mean, tight end 6. He's going at 68 in the 7th round. Depending on who's there, if there's no one you really like, then sure, take him. But be prepared to have a backup plan ready for that. So
just for reference,
a late round Jimmy Graham edition.
Your 2018 stats for Gronk: 682 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's it. That's not very Gronk is.
Speaking of another guy who is battling injuries all the time, my man Todd Gurley. Love me some Todd Gurley. He carried me to a couple of fantasy titles with the Rams, but fortunately his knees are they're not holding up, gentlemen. They're not holding up. He's reportedly healthy now, or at least healthier than he was last year. He's now with the Atlanta Falcons. He goes to a team that struggles to run the football. No more Devontae Freeman. Gentlemen, are we taking Todd Gurley hoping that he can rejuvenate his career in Atlanta? He's currently going as RB15 at pick 36. That puts him in the middle of the 4th round. He's going ahead of guys like Chris Carson, Leonard Fournette, Le'Veon Bell, David Johnson, and Melvin Gordon. At RB15, is Todd Gurley worth taking that risk?
I think so. I think he's more like a running back 20, maybe. You know, if he drops below 5th, 6th round, if he drops low, definitely snag him. You know, he could help you out at some point, but I don't like him in the first 4 rounds.
I agree. I definitely agree. I think depending on who you have as your RB1, if you have a late round pick, or if you know you can maybe sweep him, come around in the 5th, if he falls, snag him. But I definitely like Melvin Gordon's upside more so than Todd Gurley this coming season. And honestly, I potentially like David Johnson's upside more than Todd Gurley's this year.
I would take David Johnson before I'm taking Todd Gurley.
It's just with that knee, you never know. And I mean, after the season he had, that helped the Rams get to the Super Bowl, for Sean McVay to just almost completely take him out of that offense, except for, goal, like red zone situations, it's something's not right. Sean McVay, for as prideful as he can be, he's a smart guy, and he's going to use people that are healthy and good on his roster. And so I definitely am hesitant, especially on a team like the Falcons that likes to kind of throw the football a little bit. But if he's there in the early 5th and you need some maybe RB3 flex options, I definitely would snag Todd Gurley.
Listen, I know that the injury concern is there, but even in a year where he was supposed to have a workload decrease, he still touched the ball 250 plus times. He scored 14 touchdowns. Now, as we know, touchdowns can come and go, but when you look at Atlanta's backfield, I mean, you've got Ito Smith and Brian Hill, who are not going to challenge Todd Gurley for touches. They will spell him, but the opportunity is there for Todd Gurley. So is RB15 maybe a little too rich for me? Yes. I'm not taking – I mean, I would take Chris Carson. I would take Leonard Fournette. I would definitely take David Johnson before I take Todd Gurley. But, you never know. I mean, he could be a guy that, hey, if he can turn back the clock to what he was 2 years ago, he could be a fantasy steal in the 4th round. But you could say that a lot about all those guys. You could say that about Le'Veon Bell, about Melvin Gordon, about David Johnson. You could say that about all those guys. So that running group, it's very interesting that those guys are very much so high risk, high reward. So, but my answer, I would not take Todd Gurley as a top 15 running back this year. I'm with you guys. Joe, nothing?
I agree. You guys made all the points. 15, just for value, I wouldn't take him at 15, RB15. Like you said, all those other guys I would take.
All right, fair enough. We'll stick with the Falcons. So I want to make things clear before we debate the segment, because I do not want people messaging me saying, well, Thomas, what is wrong with you? We are going to debate. This is going to be an interesting debate. So we're going to debate Julio Jones versus Calvin Ridley versus Hayden Hurst. We are going to debate their ADP. I want to say something right now, so that way every single person who watches this podcast, we are all in conjecture that Julio Jones is one of the best receivers in football. We are not saying that Calvin Ridley or Hayden Hurst are better options than him. That is not what we're saying. We are going to argue at their ADP whose value is the best. So that is what we're going to argue. I know I've had this conversation with some people who are not acquainted in the fantasy world. They don't understand the concept of arguing ADP. It's average draft position. So again, we're debating the best value among those three. So obviously, Julio is going the highest. I mean, without a doubt. It's Julio Jones. He's been one of the best fantasy football receivers for almost the past decade now. It's crazy he's been in the league that long. He's going as receiver 5. He's going at pick 14, so he's going in the middle of that second round. Calvin Ridley is going receiver 18. He's going at pick 51, which puts him at the top half of the 6th, end of the 5th. And then Hayden Hurst, the newly acquired tight end from the Baltimore Ravens, is tight end 13, going in at pick 130. That puts him at the 13th and 14th round. Of those three players, where they're going right now, who is the best value in the Atlanta Falcons passing game?
I have to go Julio. I mean, if history serves correct, there's only been one time since 2012 where he's had less than 1,300 receiving yards, and it was 2013, and he had an injury. He's Matt Ryan's favorite target. I really hope he decides to start using him in the red zone a bit more because, I mean, last year he had 1,400 yards and 6 touchdowns, the third best wide receiver in PPR formats, and that was with 6 touchdowns.
And
so if he can get that up, if he can get that up to anywhere from like 8 to 10 scores, the sky's the limit for this guy. Like, he's still one of the most dominant pass catchers in the league. He's so fun to watch week in and week out. And I think if you have him as your wide receiver 1 on your fantasy team, that is a great option to have a wide receiver 1. There are a handful of receivers that I'd take before him, and there are a whole lot more that I would take before Calvin Ridley. So I definitely think that Julio is the best bang for your buck, ADP-wise, for the Falcons.
Bob, I got to agree with you on that one. You know, like you said, almost 1,400 receiving yards last season, even missing a game, and, you know, not as many touchdowns as probably would have liked. But since 2013, he's finished as a top 3 receiver in yards every year. And that's just the kind of consistency that I like to see. I know I talk about consistency a lot with a lot of different players, but I want to get someone that's going to give me production every week, and it's going to be added value to me every week.
You know,
to be honest, I hate to agree again, but I'm going to agree with you. Come on, you're going to tell me that getting the 13th best tight end at pick 130 is great value. I don't see Hayden Hurst really breaking out. Calvin Ridley, he's too up and down for me. And Julio, he's a first-round pick. And he's going in the early second.
I completely just. I think in an age where running back is so thin, guys that are going after Julio, give me my first-round running back. If I'm picking at 7, and I get Derrick Henry at 7, and I'm at 14, and my options are Chubb, Aaron Jones, Miles Sanders, Josh Jacobs, or Austin Eckler. Give me one of those running backs before I take Julio. I understand that Julio is the better fantasy play there, but if I can get Calvin Ridley in the 5th or 6th round, and listen, guys, Matt Ryan loves Calvin Ridley. Matt Ryan thinks Calvin Ridley is ready to take the next step. If Calvin Ridley did not get hurt last year, he probably finishes as a top 20 fantasy receiver, and he would have been a receiver 2. You're getting a receiver 2 in the 5th round. You can load up on those running backs and still get very good receiver value. And I would even argue, you know, Hayden Hurst has the chance to climb as a top 6 tight end. The opportunity is there. Matt Ryan loves the tight end position. He helped Austin Hooper get a massive contract with the Cleveland Browns. I would much rather have Hayden Hurst than TJ Hawkinson, Noah Fant, Jared Cook, Hunter Henry. I would even argue I would rather have Hayden Hurst than Tyler Higbee. I think Hayden Hurst going in the 14th round, he has a chance, best case scenario in my opinion, he could finish as high as tight end 6 behind Darren Waller if all things go well in that offense. To me, that value there in the 14th round, you know what you're getting with Julio. I understand that. He's a late first round, early second round pick. He's going to give you those numbers. But if you can get Calvin Ridley in the 5th or 6th round and load up on the running backs in your first 2-3 picks, give me the running backs. So that way I have my surefire elite backs. And if I get 2 or 3 good receiver 2s, Calvin Ridley's my number 1, number 2, I can live with that 100%.
You can live with Calvin Ridley being your number 1 receiver on your fantasy team?
If my first 3 picks are running backs, if I have like Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, and a running back in the 3rd round who's there, if like an Austin Eckler slips in the 3rd round, absolutely. It doesn't matter if you're as long as you need to put the best team out there. It doesn't matter if you have 1 stud running back, 1 stud receiver, 1 stud tight end. Give me my stud running backs who are going to touch the ball more, give me more chances to score points. I understand receivers are just as explosive as running backs, but I think for ADP's sake, I think Calvin Ridley, especially Julio's getting up there in age, Julio could go down. I get it, injuries could happen to anybody. But I truly think that Calvin Ridley, he's the true number 2 in that offense. There's really 3 guys who are going to demand the ball, plus Todd Gurley. I think Calvin Ridley, it wouldn't surprise me if he finished as a top 15 fantasy receiver, especially if those games are high scoring. I think that offense supports 2 top 15 fantasy football receivers.
I don't know. I
take Julio in the 2nd round.
I get what you're saying, but if you look at the amount of fantasy points that Julio puts up every season, it's very comparable with a lot of those solid running back options you have. And in PPR formats, there's so many great wide receiver options that you can get to fill in the void of not having a solid RB3 on your team. So even if you get Julio there and you drop down to other rounds, there's still solid running backs that you can get that are going to score you very similar fantasy style points to wide receiver 2. And so if you can grab Julio, you can still get a guy like Kenny Golladay, Allen Robinson, Cortland Sutton, Cooper Kupp, any of those kind of guys to be your also wide receiver 2 to complement Julio. I almost like that in PPR formats as much as having solid running back options. Because after you look at guys like Christian McCaffrey, a healthy Alvin Kamara, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, the running back position when compared to Julio Jones, they're going to have very comparable points. Especially because, I mean, Julio Jones had 100 receptions last season. That's 100 extra fantasy points tacked on to anything he did with yardage and touchdowns. And so it's that value in PPR formats that I think puts him ahead of where Calvin Ridley is at in his ADP, because you can still grab another receiver who's a wide receiver 1 on his team, because Calvin Ridley is at most, until Julio Jones leaves, a wide receiver 2 on his own team. And so I don't want him to be a wide receiver 1 on my fantasy football team. There's no way.
I'm saying if you could go 3 running backs with your first 3 picks, and then you could get Calvin Ridley in the 5th round as your receiver 2, you might even get lucky and get him in the 6th round as your receiver 3, is what I'm saying. To me, I would much rather take Calvin Ridley in the 5th or 6th round as my receiver 2 and load up on 3 running backs than have to take a guy like a James Conner or Devin Singletary and worry if they're going to get enough touches when I can guarantee myself 3 running backs who I know that are going to be workhorses. That's just my argument, is that there are just so many receivers like you just mentioned. You could get Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods.
There's a lot more depth at the running back position this season than what you're thinking. Like there's a lot of good running backs that'll be still available in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds of fantasy football drafts. You know what I mean? Like,
I don't think.
I'm just confused on. You're saying if you load up on running backs in the first 3 rounds and then you take Ridley in the 4th.
I'm saying take the 5th or the 6th where he's going, because that's his ADP.
No, I thought you were trying to say he'd be your wide receiver 2 and you're taking him as your first wide receiver.
No, I'm saying you could get him as your receiver 2, maybe even a receiver 3. I mean, guys like you have Juju, DJ Moore, Amari Cooper, Adam Thielen, Allen Robinson, Odell. These guys are going in the 4th round. These guys could easily be number 1 receivers. They have been in the past, and they have opportunity to get back there. To me, give me those elite workhorse running backs, and then in the 4th round, you take one of those guys, complement that with a Calvin Ridley in round 5. I love that more than taking Julio and then gambling on these running backs who have fallen off and can't stay healthy. That's just me. Give me the running backs every time.
I would argue that, Calvin Ridley can't really stay that healthy either. He hasn't been consistent. He hasn't proven anything. Just because his quarterback says he thinks he can take the next step doesn't mean anything until he does it.
A very good season until he got hurt.
He got hurt.
It was a hernia.
Wasn't that the argument with Teddy Bridgewater, why he didn't stay, why he wasn't good in
He's just not good, period.
Minnesota? Okay, well, you know who's going to be
not good.
His number 1 in Carolina?
Didn't he win as many games last season as Baker Mayfield did?
Who?
Teddy Bridgewater.
Well, you know what? We'll
did he go 6-1 and the 1 loss was not even a start?
The Browns eventually, but this is a big year for Baker Mayfield. Speaking of DJ Moore, we'll jump into Carolina Panthers. DJ Moore. You know, last year he was a very sneaky pick, sleeper pick for a lot of people. This year he's got some respect on his name, and rightfully so. He was actually one of the most consistent fantasy football receivers last year. If I can recall, he finished 16th at the position, didn't score a whole lot of touchdowns, only 4 touchdowns, but he was in double figures in all but 3 games last year, so that is gold in fantasy football. Now, gentlemen, I know that ESPN has ranked him as a fantasy football number 1 receiver. He's going as receiver 11. You end up with DJ Moore as your number 1 fantasy football receiver. Feel good about it.
As a number 1, no. He's probably he's a good number 2. But
doesn't bode well
number
for
1.
me. He's my number 1,
and
that's not good.
Yeah. I just think just for that value, being a wide receiver, I think his value is a lot better as a wide receiver too. You add in Robbie Anderson there in the offense. He does stretch the field a little more, but that is another mouth to beat. And Teddy Bridgewater, I just don't. I just see him as a wide receiver too.
I think if you can draft him as a wide receiver too, it'd be a great steal. You know, he did put up 232 points last year, and he's extremely efficient. I mean, he's only dropped 3 targets in his career out of 215, which in a PPR league, that's 212 points you just got right there. And again, I speak highly of Teddy Bridgewater, and I think he's going to be able to get the job done. He's going to be able to get the ball to Moore. I wouldn't draft him as a number 1 for your fantasy team, but if you could grab him as a number 2 for your fantasy team, he might put up wide receiver 1 numbers.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'll be honest. I don't love my receivers in our league. Looking back, I could have had probably better. I would prefer Allen Robinson now. Juju, Allen Robinson, Odell.
Yeah, you would.
Yes, I would. I'll be honest.
Yeah, guess who's got him?
Yeah, whatever. I would personally take Juju, Allen Robinson, and Odell before I take DJ Moore. But if I'm in the 4th round and say maybe I've gone 3 running backs, or maybe I've gone 2 running backs, and maybe I took Kelsey or Kittle, or if I took Lamar and Mahomes, and DJ Moore ends up being my number 1 receiver with that team, then I can live with that. But to you guys' point, if DJ Moore, if you're counting on him to be an elite receiver 1, the answer is no. We'll jump into New Orleans Saints. Alvin Kamara had a tough year last year. He got hurt. I guess he reportedly was playing through, I guess he said a torn MCL, to my understanding. Which, yeah, it said Kamara was playing through a MCL tear last season, which, if so, is still impressive because he ended up finishing as RB9. He still had 80 receptions. And from everything that I've seen is that Kamara should get that full workload again this year. Kamara is currently going as RB4, just behind Zeke, Barkley, and McCaffrey, and ahead of Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry. Guys, do we think Alvin Kamara can bounce back and have that elite season like he did in 2018?
100%. I definitely think so, especially when you look at the addition to Emmanuel Sanders to that offense in the offseason. He is older. Yeah, but he's definitely going to help open up that offense. No more just double covering Mike Thomas. Every time he goes out for a route, he still gets 140 catches a year. Drew Brees will hopefully be healthy the entire season, which will help keep defenses from just trying to stack the box and keep Kamara from being productive. And I also think they're going to incorporate Latavius Murray a little bit more this coming season, and he's going to fill in that Mark Ingram role that Kamara really thrived with when he was still in New Orleans. And so I definitely really like Kamara this year. Potentially, I like him more than Zeke, especially with the amount of catches he can get in the backfield. But coming off of an injury, you just never know. And Zeke is pretty mad this year at people saying that he's not as good as he used to be. So I think either one are going to be pretty much interchangeable in fantasy football.
Bob, that's a good point you make about they might use Latavius Murray more. I think if it really depends on that. If they use Kamara as more of like a change of pace back, then that'll definitely help his value, and that'll help him get back to the level he was at.
Fleck, I know you love Dalvin Cook. He was on a couple of your fantasy teams last year until he got hurt at the end of the year. He was a big reason why your team was so good, besides the fact that you also had Christian McCaffrey, which having McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook on the same team is just straight up good. But would you rather have Dalvin Cook than Alvin Kamara?
Well, you see, I was unable to draft Kamara because he was taken at the pick right before me, so I had to settle for Cook. I think this year Kamara is definitely
for Dalvin Cook.
I definitely think he's going to have a better season this year than Cook. Again, like Bob said, the addition of Emmanuel Sanders opening up that offense a little bit for him. Plus, coming off an injury, he wants to prove himself again that he's that back that he once was. He definitely remains a solid RB1 option, and he's going to help Brees and the Saints win a Super Bowl.
Oh, Drew Brees and the Saints have had some of the worst playoff luck of any team. I really hope that it's them or the Bucs that make it out of the NFC. But I do agree. I think if I'm picking Alvin Kamara or Dalvin Cook, give me Alvin Kamara. I think Dalvin Cook, he has always missed time. I don't think he's going to stay healthy again. And if someone drafted Alvin Kamara at 2 in a fantasy football league, I wouldn't even look at you funny. You know, Saquon Barkley might be the safer option. Zeke is a safer option. But, you know, you take Alvin Kamara. Again, taking Alvin Kamara over Zeke or Saquon Barkley is not going to cost you your fantasy football league. And I'm with you guys. I think Alvin Kamara is going to bounce back in a big way. I mean, again,
I think
he's.
I don't know if I'd take him over Saquon, because I could definitely see Saquon doing a very similar Todd Gurley-esque kind of career move and having a great rookie campaign.
Oh yeah.
Kind of slowed down sophomore year and then just come off the wall that third season. And especially with, you know, Daniel Jones going into his second year, that could definitely be a really good situation for Saquon. But like, I wouldn't call anybody stupid for taking Kamara over Saquon or Zeke. What he does when he's on the field is insane. The way that he can just find the open hole every time and make defenders miss like it's nothing. I love watching that man play football.
Oh yeah, he is a fun sight to see.
Was Kamara RB4 or RB5 overall?
Off in the draft, RB4. He's
RB4.
So
Is he going before Derrick Henry?
Yeah, Derrick Henry is RB6, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire is up to RB7. He is just shooting up draft boards. I mean, it's amazing. He's going ahead of Chubb, Aaron Jones, Eckler, Jacobs, Kenyon Drake, Sanders. It's crazy. Everyone is all in on the CEH hype train. You know, really quickly, I think this is an interesting debate because we cannot talk about New Orleans Saints without mentioning Michael Thomas, one of the greatest Ohio State Buckeye receivers to ever suit up in the scarlet and gray, help them get to a national championship, win a national championship. But it's interesting. Kamara is going one spot ahead of Michael Thomas. If you're at pick 5 or pick 6, would you take Alvin Kamara or would you take Michael Thomas?
Oh, that's tough.
That is tough.
That's super tough. I mean, Michael Thomas is the best fantasy wide receiver this season, coming off of what he did last year, but I don't know if he can keep that same catch rate up. Like 149 catches in a season is insane. And so with the addition of Emmanuel Sanders, they might be going away from Michael Thomas as much. And so just for someone who's going to touch the ball a lot and still be a viable pass catching option, I think I'd take Kamara, but I also love running backs more than receivers in fantasy football. So
I agree with you. The only way I'm taking Michael Thomas in a draft is if I'm sitting there anywhere after pick 4. I'm taking Michael Thomas over even Dalvin Cook, because I just don't think Dalvin Cook's going to make it through an entire season. And I know that Michael Thomas will make it through an entire season, and I know that Michael Thomas will be a stud, even though it's going to hurt my overall depth at running back. Minimizing the risk in the first round. If I'm at pick 5 and Michael Thomas is there and Alvin Kamara is not, I would definitely take Michael Thomas.
Might take Henry there, honestly.
Could take Henry. I wouldn't, I would not.
With as deep as this year is in fantasy wide receiver options, I would rather try to get, in a top 5 pick, I'm trying to get one of the top 5 running backs in the league. And then try to get one of those like Allen Robinson, Kenny Golladay, Courtland Sutton. The list goes on and on of viable wide receiver ones that you can get in the 3rd or 4th round.
Sure. No, that's fair.
I think one person fantasy value wise for the New Orleans Saints that we should talk about, Will Lutz. We don't talk about kickers much.
Oh my gosh.
And I think
a reference that we have had on this podcast. 5 weeks, almost 5 weeks without a reference about kickers.
We didn't even talk about Robbie Gould when we went over the 49ers. That's my boy.
All right, well, the only reason I bring up Will Lutz is because last year the only person that outscored him was Harris Buckner. Is that how you say that?
Oh my gosh. You're kidding.
Right? He's the only one that outscored him last year. And the Saints.
What are you getting at? Are you saying you would take Will Lutz as the number 1 kicker in fantasy?
I mean, there's an argument for it. He's probably one of the safest bets as far as kickers go. He's had 4 consecutive top 7 fantasy campaigns. And I don't know. The Saints are going to score a lot. Like we've talked about, this division's going to be high scoring, okay? And even if the Saints can't score a touchdown, they're going to drive down the field and get into that field goal range, which Lutz has had a very accurate career. I like him. I like him as a number 1 kicker, if not number 2.
So
that's all I'm saying. We don't talk about kickers a lot.
I better, you know what, Fleck, next episode or maybe in a month or so, I better see a Will West jersey on then. Let's get it going. Let's get it going. Last topic that I want to touch on with the Saints, because we've already kind of touched on Emmanuel Sanders, but after Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara, is there anybody that you're going after? Jared Cook and Emmanuel Sanders are probably the 2 next viable fantasy options. You have the Swiss Army knife and Taysom Hill. Is there any player on that offense that sticks out? Latavius Murray as well. Anybody that you guys would target in drafts?
Enough to like make a valuable pick on? No. I wouldn't take Taysom Hill unless I have probably just my last pick. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, I would maybe late rounds, if he's still there, try to grab Latavius Murray if you have Kamara as a handcuff. Because last year when Kamara went down, Latavius Murray popped off. I mean, it's just Sean Payton's system. Like, Kamara's obviously a great running back, but, I mean, every running back that Sean Payton's pretty much ever had has done well. And so having a handcuff there, rounds like 11, 12, if you already have pretty much your solid starting lineup drafted, maybe take a chance on Latavius Murray. Emmanuel Sanders, late round, you just don't know what he's going to do. He was a good fantasy option for the 49ers last year, but he is getting up there. He's still one of the most reliable receivers in the league, though. So late round, some Saints, if they're still out there, I definitely grab them just with how prolific that offense can be.
Sure. In a dynasty league, obviously you're fading Emmanuel Sanders. He's getting drafted right before Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb, which at that point in the draft, at receiver 43, 44, and 45, I'm taking one of those rookies and maybe seeing them pop off. But I think Emmanuel Sanders could be an intriguing option with Drew Brees and the Saints for sure, especially at receiver 43. Could be a nice flex fill-in buy for when your team starts going through the buys. I think Jared Cook will still have a pretty nice season, but I think out of all the guys, I think Emmanuel Sanders' entrance to the team definitely takes away from Jared Cook. I think those two are going to be kind of fighting for Drew Brees' attention as that second pass catcher. So I would take Emmanuel Sanders if you can get him at the right price. He'd be a receiver 5. I think it's intriguing, but nothing that I'm breaking the bank for.
One last thing, guys. We're nearing the end of this episode. I had a friend of mine who's kind of new to fantasy, hasn't really played it a lot. He was watching one of our episodes, and we've been using the term handcuff a lot. And he didn't want to DM us or anything, so he just texted me. He wasn't quite sure what we meant when we were talking about handcuffs. So if someone would love to explain that, people at home watching can get a little better grasp of the terminology there.
As a Bears fan, I had to do this every year. I drafted Matt Forte of the handcuff. So a handcuff is a guy who is a backup to probably the starting running back who's still viable, who will get the playing time if that player is sort of injury prone. So a great example is Matt Forte when the Bears picked up Michael Bush in free agency, who was a pound the ball kind of guy. He'd still get 12 to 15 points a game when Forte was down. If you can grab that person to be a handcuff to them, so where if they do go down, you have the number 2 guy right away to put in that lineup to still get you at least 10 points. I always preach, if you can get a lineup where besides your quarterback and RB1 and wide receiver 1, if every other player can get you at least 10 points, you're going to be golden. And so if you can grab that handcuff to be there in case they do go down, you don't have to worry about trying to get into the waivers. And if it's a bidding lead, a lot to get them off the waivers. It's just good to have, especially for, like I said, for Kamara this year, coming off an injury, he could definitely re-aggravate that and miss a week or two. You just plug Latavius Murray right in your lineup. Don't even have to worry about it.
I agree. I mean, obviously,
thank you for explaining that.
Are very important. And I would even argue if you're I'm in a dynasty league where we're in a big dynasty league where the roster is pretty deep. I would even argue that you could take other handcuffs with the hope that maybe, I think, picking Tony Pollard for the Cowboys, Alexander Madison for the Vikings. Mm-hmm. Those are guys that come to my mind as handcuffs that could be extremely valuable because then you have them, you can use them as trade leverage.
Yep.
The guy who has one of those guys, if Dalvin does go down, which usually he does miss a game or two, sometimes drafting a handcuff late like that. Now, would I reach for a handcuff of a guy that I don't own? Absolutely not. But if he's just sitting there and the guy who clearly doesn't want to get the handcuff, like sometimes being the smart fantasy manager is getting a handcuff that could be a very good player if the top guy goes down. So sometimes fantasy football, it's getting a little creative like that in terms of drafting.
Yeah, I would say definitely pay attention to who your competition's drafting. If you're the pick right before the guy who has, like I'll do an example of the year that Le'Veon Bell held out and nobody knew if he was going to play or not. If the guy in front of you drafted Le'Veon Bell, or if you're in front of the guy who drafted Le'Veon Bell and you say James Conner there late round, try to snag him in front of him, and then Le'Veon Bell ends up holding out the entire season, they're going to try to trade for him if they can. And if not, he's their starting running back, and you might have a late round stud on your roster.
You got a free RB1.
Right.
Yeah.
Another way to think about the handcuff is, like, say you take Latavius Murray to handcuff Kamara this year, you're getting the backfield. You're guaranteeing yourself the production from the Saints backfield, no matter who's there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Sure. No, I agree.
I'm not going to name drop here, but you're watching this, buddy. There's your answer to what a handcuff is.
Just tell him to fast forward to the end if you really wants to know.
Nah, he's sticking through the whole episode. Get the answer.
Excellent.
Listen over.
Well, guys, that was a fun episode 5. I think the NFC South has the chance to be one of the best, if not the best, divisions in terms of real life football and fantasy football. And I forgot to mention at the beginning, this podcast is presented by Two Cups, one of our proud official sponsors of the Average Fantasy Cast. You can go on their website. You can follow them on Twitter, their Instagram. They've got lots of good merch. I know that Griffin works tirelessly. He just hit 1,000 followers. Big shout out to him. He just started the business this past spring, I believe. So he's doing very well for himself. So good stuff with them. You can find all of our episodes on their Instagram page, on their website. They link it with us. So I know I got to press into Griff. We're working on the merch, getting some Average Fantasy Cast merch, because we're going to come out here. We're going to have our nice T-shirts on. And who knows, maybe Griffin can make us like a poster or something. That'd be pretty cool. Make us like a nice little flag. But who knows? So we NFC this week, probably go to the AFC. You know what? Screw it. Week 6, AFC North.